For 45 years, his photographic practice has captured some of Florida's most important moments, including the old world Jewish community of South Beach, refugees from the Haitian boat lift at Chrome, a resettlement camp, and migrant workers in our agricultural industry. He's also done wonderful photographs of some of our great tourist attractions here in Florida, like at Walt Disney World. Gary served as senior professor of photography at Daytona State College for 30 years. And during that time, he amassed a collection of nearly 1,000 artworks by Florida's self-taught artists, from sculpture and clay, wood and tin, to paintings on grocery bags and pizza boxes. All these things you can see here at the Boca Raton Museum of Art. When you would like to visit, please remember that members, as you all are, can take advantage of our member mornings on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday mornings. Just call us in advance and we can provide a very special time for you before the museum opens to the public. But now my pleasure to introduce Gary Monroe, who joins us from his home in Ormond Beach. Gary?
Good morning. Thank you, Irvin, very, very much. Pleasure to be with you. Greetings, everybody. And let's start the show. The exhibition was conceptualized by Irvin when I talked to him about considering a show of outsider art. It's actually very, very daring for a museum to take on, because many of the artworks and the ideas behind them rub against the grain of accepted artistic nomenclature and practices. In the last 20 years or 25 years, this art by self-taught artists, most of whom are somewhat eccentric, as you'll see, have been co-opted into the mainstream of museum and fine art thinking. And I hope that you find the works interesting, intriguing, as the artists are, and also are able to integrate your thoughts about what art means and what art can be. I think for this exhibition, we have about 50 artists and 85 or 86 works, which were culled from about 75 artists in the collection. And amongst the works are some of my favorite, which I'll talk about and try to express why they're meaningful, at least to me and hopefully to you as well. With that said, may we begin with the first image? The installation, which is absolutely stunning, and I've had nothing to do with. Excuse me. I should also credit Irvin came up with the title, An Irresistible Urge to Create. Left to me, it was rather boring. And again, it too is daring to use the word outsider, because that word, according to scholars over the last couple of decades, has lost favor because it suggests a marginalization of the already marginalized. But yet these people are outsiders, making art which frankly not their primary concern. They weren't interested in resumes or gallery representation. They simply had a deep urge to explore their inner resources and to see how they came out on paper, wood, etc. And the installation is absolutely stunning, as are all the installations in your museum. And that's a wall of George Voronovsky's work. I can't wait to see it in person. The work on the right there is by a Boca Raton artist. Now we'll start with the actual work itself. In 2003, the University Press of Florida published my book, Extraordinary Interpretations, Florida Outsider Artists. And the book was a survey of then contemporary self-taught outsider artists. But in the introduction, I wrote about a few artists, including Jesse Aaron, who was deceased when I was doing my research, but part of a pantheon of artists working in total isolation. And Aaron's contribution was, as many of these artists are, touched by God and got a message to start creating and to start carving. And as you can see from this first image of his, please. The next, he would use found wood, parts of trees primarily, and then he would find the shape that was buried inside of the into the wood itself, and made these cryptic, mysterious beings. These have become a staple of Florida self-taught art, and his work is part of the national conversation of outsider art. And next slide, please. I did, of course, meet Gene Beecher. He was living when I did my research. He was an accomplished musician, always a bit of a character. As a child, he fell down a well shaft and had night tremors ever since. And I guess he was always spooked by that. And in his later years, he started to paint. And these very ghoulish, we can look at the image, please. These very ghoulish figures emerged from his paintings. Slide, please. Next slide, please. We seem frozen. There we go. And there's a Gene Beecher painting. You know, one of the benefits about not going to school to learn art is you don't know what not to do, and I think often much is lost to a formal education in the arts, at least. And artists like Beecher and the self-taught artists are totally unchained to tradition. They're not bound to theory. Color is a function of fun and expression, and he made these remarkably odd and ghoulish people in thousands of variations. In his last years, he was living in a nursing home in Lakeland, Florida, and he was a real prankster. He'd get up in the middle of the night and he'd walk into the hallways of this pristine building, and he would tack up some of his paintings around just to spook people in the morning. And it must have worked because they were just these bizarrely beautiful, expressive, scary beings. Okay, Polly Bernard. Rather quiet women lived in the town of Floral City on the near the Gulf Coast in North Florida. And she made recollections of her childhood. This was her bedroom as she remembered it. And she didn't talk very much about her work. She said she was somewhat psychic and just made these remarkably odd paintings, and not very many of them, as I remember. And again, lived in solitude in this beautiful Victorian home in this otherwise rather desolate community, making these paintings for herself. Okay. Mr. B, named Jack Beverland. Mr. Beverland worked for a corporation, and he hated it. He hated 20 years of what he did. He hated the abuse that his boss would thrust upon him and others, and he hated being fired. And when he was fired, he plotted the demise of his boss. He polished his gun and loaded it, and he was just fuming angrily. And his brother-in-law intervened, and he said, "Jack, this is not healthy. You have to find another outlet." And he gave him paints, and he started painting. And he's been painting for about 30 years now. And it makes these essentially bucolic scenes, often thematic, like the arc here. And he uses 3 different kinds of paints on each board. And one kind of paint is glow in the dark. So if you walk into a darkened room or you turn the lights out in a room, this painting will still be very visible to you. And he becomes somewhat of a spokesperson. I was lecturing at the Cummer Museum in Jacksonville, 15, 18 years ago, about self-taught Florida artists. And I invited Mr. B to join me there because he loves the attention. And we were on stage, must have been 300 people. And in the middle of his conversation, he got so emotional, he started to cry and break down. So I had to put my arms around him. But I think that kind of emotion is germane to most of these artists. This is his nephew, Robin Beverland. His nickname was the Beaver. And Robin was born with a rare disease called Wolfram syndrome. And I think his mom said there was like 70 people in the country that had this illness. And to help him therapeutically, his parents bought him usually squares of wood, 2-foot square plywood, and house paint. And he made these remarkably lyrical paintings with sayings on them. This is a very unusual piece for him because it's obviously very, very long, more of a panoramic style than what he had typically done. And I think one of his more beautiful and telling paintings. And I said to him, I said, "Robin, you have a remarkable sense of color." And I said, he says, "I do?" I said, "Yeah, you really do." He goes, "Oh, gee, that's funny. I just read the labels on the can and go from there." So it was that kind of lyrical sense that informed his sensibilities and his lack of seriousness or being overly deliberate with his work. Susan Blankmeyer in Winter Park, Florida, is not your typical outsider artist. In fact, her husband is a renowned psychiatrist, and I guess she's had her own travail to see through. And she started painting, and she also started giving painting workshops and poetry workshops because she writes as well. And this is a large piece of hers, and I think it's absolutely stunning. Perhaps my favorite piece in the exhibition. It makes no sense to me, but it's just remarkable to behold, and that kind of iconic, almost cave-like present imagery, and it's just so stunning and rich. Patricia Calamari lives in Boca Raton. She's an artist in her own right, but the work that we have in the show comes not from her, but from her studio. She's given her life to helping people with disabilities to express themselves creatively. And I've been to her workshops, and some of the people are so in need of assistance that they can only paint by her having attached a paintbrush to the helmet that they have to wear, and they paint with moving their head around. She also helps them and puts her hands on the paper if they can't have the mobility to do it themselves. But under her tutelage, they come out with these stunning images. And these are unusual. Most of them are color, but I just love these gesture drawings, which we all did when we were in art school. But at least I didn't do any quite as wonderful as these. Ferdinand Cooper was a mysterious character, lived in solitude. I met him just before he passed away. He had built, after the World War II, a hut in his parents' backyard in their home in Sanford, Florida, on the St. Johns River outside of Orlando. And he lived in this small, probably 8 by 10 foot hut for the rest of his life. And the hut was so beautiful, not well constructed, but so well decorated that the Smithsonian imported the entire hut into their collection. At the end of his life, when I was interviewing him, he gave me these drawings. So in the world of the self-taught, these are pretty rare pieces to have, and I think pretty coveted amongst others that know who he is. Tom Cummings from Gainesville was a member of the organization ARC, where he would go daily and paint and gain a lot of self-esteem. He was very proud of his paintings, and they're on large pieces of cardboard. And he had florals like this, but he also painted cityscapes and buildings and things like that. And he was very proud. He would sell them for a couple of dollars a piece, and would brag, not everybody can paint like me. So it helped with his self-esteem. Plus it yielded these intriguingly decorative works of art. Cathie Diazki's father was a well-known doctor in the Daytona Beach area. She was schizophrenic, and to the point where she'd walk the streets talking to herself for hours on end, and was not particularly personable. But when her father gave her paint, she came alive and made these remarkable paintings, like this one of these two birds in that incredible red field. I mean, you couldn't get anything more evocative and more dealing with the idea of struggle and power than she left us. Arthur Dessaler lived in an African-American community in Fort Pierce, Florida. And I was driving through Fort Pierce, and I just saw his front yard, which is where this photograph was taken. And he had made these dioramas, these 4-foot glass enclosed dioramas. It was an incredible yard, and he invited me to come visit him. And in his 1-story house, it's above a garage that he rented. He would make these collages. He would walk to the beach and pick up debris, and he'd come back home and he'd make these assemblages. Then they're rather large assemblages, and just abstract and unexplainable, inexplicable. And I just think kind of wonderful in their own right, have this great presence about them. So then I went to see him just before he passed away, and he had moved into a little rooming house. And I said, "Where's all your artwork?" And he said, "Oh, I dropped it off at the Salvation Army." And that was that. Brian Dowdle was well known in the field of self-taught artists. And was a real character, as most of these people are. An old hippie from San Francisco, wound up in Cocoa, Florida, where he made paintings. This is one of my favorite pieces of his, just totally expressive, totally off the wall. And just, as you're making it, you're defining it, or it's defining itself. Like many outsider artists, working in isolation seems to be a real benefit. And once they become exposed and commodified, they become self-conscious. And I know that Brian's work later in his life lost the steam, the drive, the angst of his early work. They became decorative and almost designed to be in children's rooms. So I was really fortunate to meet these artists before there was much acclaim or interest in their work. Boy Yeaglin in Miami lived worked at the Lighthouse for the Blind. He was blind, and he just took great stock in weaving rugs. And I think the next one is next photograph should be one of his rugs. He would just sit on the floor and weave these things together. And one of my favorite comments that any of the artists made to him, he says, I make two types, round and hot dog. I said, what's a hot dog? He goes, oval shaped. So those are the two shapes that he focused upon. And he kept active and he kept vital. Excuse me, Milton Ellis, New Smyrna Beach, Florida. Excuse me. I did not know about until I read an article in the local newspaper that was about his being one of three homes that were destroyed in the hurricanes that came by. There was a year there were 3 hurricanes that came by in a month, and he had to vacate his property which he had rented. He had no money, and a church put him in Section 8 housing, and all that he saved was a bag of personal effects and about 25 murals, about some of them were, I think, about 7 feet high or wide, and yet they were all, most of them were rolled up and stored, and they were all made in about 1977. He lived in Miami, and he's been carting them around. They're all reverse paintings on Mylar, and when he passed away, his caretaker asked me if I would help preserve them. Fool that I am, I said, of course I will. It's really interesting art, and otherwise are destined to the garbage heap. And in fact, we had them all flattened, and we're getting ready to do some showing with those. Reaver Freeman lived in Aventura, in a typical condo apartment there, but untypically, every surface, the floors, the doors, the walls were covered with her incessant paintings, many on tar paper, and she'd work on 20 at a time. This is about 5 feet tall. And you open up her closet, they'd fall out onto you. And she said, I smeared a little here, I smeared a little there. She just worked obsessively. I think most of these artists are obsessive in what they're doing. And again, painting with just great, when you see this, when you go to the museum, if you're able to go to the museum, there's just such great presence and power in these works, especially Riva's. Tony Garan is one of 4 young Orlando-based outsiders. And these guys are truly living outside of the norm, although he lived with his mother at the time. And he had taken a part of the house and converted it into his own little shrine, a little workspace. And he made some wonderful things. Amongst them was this mask, which was a wall hanging, looks like a mask or a face. And just, 1,000 pieces, forming this incredibly interesting visage. John Gertis lived in Orlando, also in the Maitland area. He was an electrician, and he that's his garage door, by the way. He made paintings that looked like they were inlaid wood marquetry, but they were actually very painstakingly painted. I think we have one in the show, but we have 2 different pieces here. So I fell in love with that collage he made from magazine cuttings. I just thought it was phenomenal. And it was still part of that oeuvre, that great body of work of painstaking application of material. When computer circuit boards were new, he started making lamps out of it. I believe there's a 3rd piece hanging of one of his marquetry pieces. The Manellos, big collectors with a museum named after them in Orlando, championed Gertis's work and got a couple of beautiful pieces in the Smithsonian Museum. Sybil Gibson was before my time with this work. She was living in Miami, and had some gift wrapping paper from Burdines, which most of us remember. And she started drawing, and she couldn't stop. And then she started getting paper bags from, I guess back then it might have been Food Fair, if not before Publix. And she would soak the grocery bags to dissolve the glue and paint on the paper. And she used watercolor. And because she painted when they were still damp, the watercolor sort of blended and molded. And she just kept repeating these paintings of women's faces. And they become staples now in the outsider art world. Brian Gowan's Bubba said, I just love guns. I'm not a dangerous man, but I love guns, couldn't live without them. And around his house in Sanford, Florida, which was all fenced in, he had signs, the painting signs. And there were 20 of them hung up all around his house, and they were to ward off criminals. Kept the gun above his bed, and he said, "Not a dangerous man. I just love guns, and I want to keep it safe around here." This is my favorite of his gun paintings. Repeated themes, and they're enhanced with glitter, and I think they're just wonderful. Rodney Hardy. Rodney was worked in an orange juice factory in Lakeland, Florida, and started painting. But he has a heart of gold, and as interested as he was in his own painting, he was just as interested in enabling others to paint that had never worked in the arts before. So he had limited funds, but he was often, buying materials from people and said, just try it and just give it a shot. He only painted about 12 a year of angels and dogs and cats and embellished like this, very sweet, pleasant imagery, just like he is. In Gainesville, Florida, Aileen Harris worked in a cafeteria in a mall in the university, and when she went home, she would paint, and also incessantly. Most of them are 8 by 10 or 9 by 12 inches. This one, I believe, is what's 24 by 36 inches. It's one of her jungle scenes. Heavy application, a lot of impasto, but no real deliberation. She wasn't going to use underdrawings. She just attacked her board. It was just the same way she thought, just go right at it and just come out with this stunning painting. Of course, not all are stunning, but the ones that are with any artist's work are just beyond belief. Oh, this is one of our favorite artists, Mama Johnson, from St. Petersburg, lived in a shotgun home, was told by the Lord to paint. And in fact, she said to me, I'm not proud because I know my Bible. And she lived by those words, but she made paintings of two sorts. Ones were her missionary girls out to do good. It's a quote. And the other is her aliestos, which was her endearing term for aliens. And most of her paintings, you'll see some in the exhibition, are just done with 2 or 3 or 4 magic markers, just these line drawings of them, lines taking shape, finding form and expression. And I just think that she's one of the most underrated and most interesting artists working in Florida, or having worked in Florida. Janice Kennedy, I did not know well. She was as mysterious as a person as she was a painter. She was very friendly and pleasant, but like many of these artists, she had a troubled childhood. And I think the next slide was about a painting of hers about abuse she had suffered as a child, and the painting is just as haunting as testifying to her own trauma. She'd left Florida soon after I had met her, so I don't know much about her, but I just think it's a pretty remarkable painting. Carl Nickerbacher is one of the 4 younger guys from the Orlando area. Carl went to college, graduated University of Central Florida, and I believe political science. And then he retreated from the world, became a caretaker on 16 acres of pristine central South Florida property where he just made his own paintings. And they're mostly all of them are thematic, dealing with contemporary social issues and ills. And a lot of that, because he's in Central Florida, have Mickey Mouse ears, because of course it's such a great presence around here. But he's got a series of his potted women coming out of pots as if there were plants coming to bloom, and of course commenting on television and commercialism. And he's still at it. Started making 8mm films. One of the more intriguing people is Dwayne Locke. Dwayne Locke is a retired professor from the University of Tampa, where he spent a long career and he was a very prolific poet. And he started making these paintings, 2 foot by 4 feet. It's one of our favorite. And he would post them in his large inner city Tampa yard on 2x4s, probably 40 or 50 of them posted and weathering. And on the weekends, he'd have 10, 15, 20 young poet students gathering out there, and they would talk poetry and life and etc., surrounded by the paintings. And all of them have literary references. And some of them on the back, he explains the origin of who he's referencing in these paintings. And he asked us to take care of them when he was getting old, and we stored them for years. And a couple of years ago, I put a call out to anybody that wanted a free painting. So now they're 30 or so floating around the state of Florida. Woody Long was a self-taught artist living in the Panhandle, and he was a success. He had his own studio. People came to him. He had a name, a reputation, and he made these wonderful gestural paintings. They were also thematic, be it sharecroppers or dancers, etc. And the next one is one he had gifted me. It's an 8x10, which is very, very small for him, but I thought incredibly exquisite. And but he was a real not a go-getter, but he and his wife had this successful gallery, and a lot of folk art collectors would visit them and buy from them. And Gloria Ludwig was totally unknown, and I won't bore you with the details now, but he lived in De Leon Springs near the St. Johns River in Central Florida, and he made his own religion called revisionism, and he worked in copper and in jewels, mostly turquoise, and he made these incredible crowns and pieces of jewelry. And I mean, you hold these things and say, "My God, what do I have here?" And he lived in isolation. He had a young wife who kept a record of everything he had done, and he wanted his own museum built. And when he passed away, his wife had stored everything in 2 storage units. And 5 years later, although she was devoted to him, she had moved on in her life, left the state, had a new boyfriend, and had her neighbor, after about 5 years, stop paying the rent and just said, just dump it all. And I got a phone call because I live nearby, and I rescued it all. So it's now all in storage. But I just think his work is just gorgeous. And like many of these artists, if they don't have somebody looking out for them, their work winds up in garbage dumpsters, literally. Mario Mesa from Miami came on the 1980 boat lift, and he started making these haunting paintings. It's almost it is literally 3-dimensional what comes out of the background, but just such a haunting image of his troubled psyche and his trauma that he went through. And that very little is known about him other than he lived in Little Havana and left this trove of paintings. I think the Perez Museum has one. They had called me for some dates of his life. Francis Moore lived in Hawthorne, Florida, a small town east of Gainesville. He was born and raised there, raised his family there. His wife, Mary, was from the same town. And for one of his birthdays, his wife, Mary, gave him a certificate for painting classes at the local library. And he said, "Mary, I have no interest in that. I don't want to paint." She goes, "Well, you have to." He goes, "No, I don't." She goes, "Yeah, you do. It's just they needed 10 people, and this is the 10th. You're the 10th one. So without you, there's no class." So he begrudgingly went there, and he came home and he hated it. He said, "I quit." He said, "I don't want to paint flowers and vases." But he had this bug to paint, and he started painting images of the history of the town of Hawthorne, so still in the back country. And he created, I think, over 100 different scenes, 10 of which now hang in the little history museum and old church in Hawthorne. But he became a fixture. He would sell his paintings or try to sell his paintings at outdoor art shows like in Gainesville. And whenever he sold one, he'd repaint it because they were an integral part of the overall story of Hawthorne's history. Mr. Eddie Mumma was also that earlier generation of self-taught artists, and I think one of the most interesting. He was a double amputee, lived in a small home in Gainesville, and he also went to a painting class and couldn't stand. The teacher told him he had no talent, never went back, but he started painting like crazy, and he painted almost exclusively the same troubadour-like figure in just as many variations as he attempted to paint, and just had this great presence about them. They're just so unexpected. And when he passed away, his work wound up in a garbage dumpster. His family had emptied out the house, and a collector, Josh Feldstein from Gainesville, was riding his bike by. He knew Mr. Eddy, and he acquired a few hundred of Mr. Eddy's paintings out of the trash dumpster, and fortunately saved them, and now they're a respected body of work. Ed Ott lived in Lakeland. Very proud man, started painting, I believe it was after the death of his wife, a traumatic experience. And he bought a trailer, an empty trailer, and he made it into his own museum of his paintings. Very, very proud. And this is one of his Black Santa Claus paintings. He made a few of them. In fact, the filmmaker, Jonathan Demme, collected outsider art in a big way, as well as Haitian art. And he had one of Mr. Ott's Black Santas in his collection as well. Frank Ritchie lives in Ormond Beach and lived with his parents, was schizophrenic, lived in a darkened room, very pleasant man. And he would make these paintings. They're all the same. They're all, I want to say pointillism, but they weren't pointillism, although they were really just obsessiveness. And he painted exclusively snow scenes. He wanted to be a weatherman when he was a child. He had a very tender soul and was in the Navy. He had a breakdown, and that was the end of his service. And he came home and he lived with his parents and just kept making different versions of these beautiful snow scenes. And he gave up painting and he started gardening and became a gardener. Robert Roberg is a religious zealot. I think I can say that. He's a good friend of mine too. And he was a street corner preacher in Nashville. He was a small man. And he was preaching. He used to get pushed around and beaten up and cursed at. And he was undeterred. And he said he got some chalk and he drew some pictures on the sidewalk of references to what he was ministering about. And he said people stopped, listened, were interested, were polite. And that started his artistic voyage. And he just started making these wonderful, unrestrained painting. This is his Hellbound train. I believe it was about alcoholism. And he's still at it. He's still going strong. He did 100 paintings of the Book of Revelation and just keeps making these remarkable paintings. I think we have 2 or 3 in the exhibition. O.L. Samuels from Tallahassee is probably, in my way of thinking, Florida's finest sculptor. Also a very strong man, very eccentric. I remember he used to blow air into his breath into his hands and rub his sculptures to give them his energy. And they sure came out energetic. This is a rather large piece as well, about 5 feet long, with a great, remarkable, scary, haunting presence. But he too, later in life, his work became a bit more sedate and pleasant. But I just love the detail, the power. In fact, I drove to Moultrie, Georgia, to see an exhibition, it's a small town in Georgia, of his work where he's from. And I don't think I'd ever seen a more wonderful exhibition than O.L.'s sculptures in that one little gallery. Milton Schwartz lived in Miami Beach and South Beach before South Beach was fully recognized as South Beach. Lived in a kind of a boarding home hotel. And he just made these messages with collaging and writing. They're file folders, and he worked on both sides of them, each thematic and each expressing his beliefs and angst with the world. Became pretty much a fixture and pretty well respected. Joey Smallin was a real New York character, sold cars, a tough guy and good talker. And when he retired to Lakeland, he started painting. And he painted his recollections of some of the highlights of his earlier life in New York City. I think the next slide is a subway. It just has the light and feel of a subway. The Coca-Cola signage are collaged on, but he just kept knocking out these remembrances of his tough, crazy youth in New York City. Morgan Steele, one of the other young Orlando-based artists, who I think is a terrific painter, very small, using acrylics, and was living at a bird sanctuary, a place where injured birds were brought in for rehab. And his job was to keep the place clean. And in exchange, he was allowed to live on the couch there. And he made these paintings that he would sell for a couple, $3, $5. The mailman bought some. I bought 15 of them, and just had this, hippie, not hippie, but not in the mainstream lifestyle. And a few years back, he had some wealthy relatives, and the last one had passed away, and he inherited a ton of money. And they went out and he bought a little house in Winter Park, Florida, and he bought a nice Mercedes Benz. And a couple of months later, he was in an accident with his car, and he was killed in his early 40s. Tragic. Don Stone from Lakeland came from a pilgrim family, went back generations and very sophisticated, and started painting. And I acquired 3 of his circus paintings because they're just so unique and so interesting to look at. And I think we have a couple of them in the exhibition. John Summers in DeLand, Florida, 2-3 blocks from my home. I would drive by his house regularly. It's a street corner in a very nice neighborhood, a lot of oak trees covering the large property. And on the split rail fence, he had hung about 20, 25 paintings. Most of them were framed simply, and it had a sign that said free art. And I thought it was an art project, a conceptual art project by Stetson University art students. And I kept going by there and seeing different paintings. And one day I just knocked on his door. I said, I live down the street here. What's going on? He goes, oh, I just got into painting and I don't need the money, so just give them away. And, you see kids walking, school kids nearby, or people walking, taking them from into their cars. And so I spent time with him, and I wrote a long essay about him. But they're these charming little paintings, and he invented a technique of painting acrylic on glass and then taking it off the glass and applying it to the canvas, then embellishing that. They have a real nice surface and presence to them. Great field paintings. Melvin Pop Thayer lived in Highway 17, Central Florida, between St. Augustine and Orlando. A 2-lane highway, used to be the substitute for US 1. And he made these whirligigs. They're rather large. They're on posts. They blow in the wind. Some of them are very complicated, and they have cranks and shafts that move parts of them around. And, like most artists, he said, I'm not an artist. I just draw these things out and see if I can make them. And he had 40 of them in his yard at one time. So it was quite a sight to drive past his home. I guess I was trying to express, too, that ego was never part of the equation to most of these artists. It was to some, of course. It's probably the death of their creativity also. But a lot of people just create for the sake of creating. And a snake is not an uncommon motif for self-taught artists, especially. And I found this one 25 years ago, I think, might have been in an estate sale. But I've never seen one as beautiful and just as powerful as this snake. And it's in 3 pieces: the tree root, an acorn at the end of it, and another piece of wood, and the fangs coming out. It's just a wonderful piece, wonderful sculpture. George Voronovsky, who's responsible to getting me into this crazy world, and a man who my family became to adore. And I know that Irvin's a strong supporter, interested in George's work too. When I came back from grad school in 1977 to my home in Miami Beach, I came back expressly to photograph the endings of the old world Jewish community, which many of you remember. Most people in Miami Beach have no idea. And then the hotels were all whitewashed, except for George's windows in the front of the Colony Hotel on 8th and Ocean. And I looked up and I see, these buildings that are, falling apart, and George's windows looked beautiful. So I went to meet him, and it just changed my world, changed me. And George is what's called a memory painter, literally painting his recollections of his charmed youth in Kiev, Ukraine. And came World War II, he was interned in a concentration camp. And after the war is over, he's released, never sees his family, his wife and 2 children again. There's a 7-year blank. He winds up in Philadelphia working on the railroad, attracting no attention, doing menial work. And then he dreams of coming to paradise in the form of Miami Beach, and does. And he gets this beautiful room, and he's polite, sweet as can be. And he just starts painting on the back of pizza boxes and the like with watercolors from Woolworth's what he recalls of his youth, because after his youth, his life went to hell. And Teresa and I adopted him and kept him under our wing, brought him into her large family, and Kate saw to his needs through his death. Purvis Young is perhaps the most well-known Florida outsider artist. Very familiar name, of course, in South Florida. That was where he lived, in that studio, that warehouse. He lived in a mattress, and that was it, surrounded at any time by 1,000 or 2,000 paintings, always changing. And I had, over the years, I met him in 1978, I think. So I've known him for a long time. And over the years, I think I must have bought 125 of his paintings. And it's nice to have first shot at these things. Back then, only 10 of us knew where he lived. So it's really great to visit him and talk about life through his eyes and see how his imagery, how his eyes manifest in his imagery. That's one of his stronger portraits. In more dire times, that kind of halo turned into a helmet. Miss Ruby lives outside of Lakeland in a town, not even a town, it's not even a junction, called Beesville. And it's on the way to, I believe, Tampa. And she grew her own produce, and you can come and drive up and buy strawberries, etc. Then she started to paint signs, and then the signs became more artistic, and she became more expressive. This one reached tired of being the good guy. And she's become sort of a darling in the self-taught art world. Kurt Zimmerman, Cocoa Beach, Florida, is of German descent, and during World War II, he was a pilot assigned to dropping bombs on Germany. And I guess he was tender of heart and spirit. And he had some mental breakdowns, was institutionalized, and came out painting, making these wild paintings. There were 3 or 4 different motifs. One was he'd walk the river shore, and he'd pick up dead fish or birds, and he'd use those to paint. He even painted the inside of his Ford truck motor, but he also painted aliens, creatures from another being, and these wild scenes of animals. But of all the artists, he and Purvis Young were the most painterly in terms of their approach to applying paint. And he made his own frames as well. And we thank Irvin for the title, An Irresistible Urge to Create, which sums up perfectly the idea behind studying and being interested in this form of artwork. I think we've come to the end of the program.
Thanks so much, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
You're welcome for my rambling.
If there are any questions, you can use there's a raise hand option at the bottom of your screen, or chat, or even Q&A. So we open the floor to questions. I have one, which is, yes. You must have logged thousands of miles crisscrossing Florida. How do you discover these people?
Well, these people were interesting because it was 25 years ago when I started. I was taking a year off from my darkroom work, because I've always had 300 rolls of film staring me down. And I wanted to think through the issues of mid-career, midlife. So I thought I'd do something really simple. I would just photograph outsider artists because their art and person interested me. And I knew of a few of them. And all of a sudden, I traveled from Key West to Jacksonville to Pensacola and crisscrossed the state. And you're right, it was thousands of miles before cell phones and before GPS. I don't know how I did it, no idea. I would just hear of somebody, or somebody would mention somebody's name, and I just followed my instincts and wore out 3 sets of tires, and suddenly had an archive.
I see Tatiana Bernice Winger has a question.
Yes. Hello, thank you for that very interesting talk.
You're welcome, Bernice.
There are so many men and women who have this talent, and they don't seem to have the pressures of society. Can any attempt be made to have them teach children in poor neighborhoods who are never exposed to art?
Yeah. I think Jack Beverland does that. Excuse me. And Patricia Calamari in Boca Raton has altered her program to work with senior citizens. And I'm sure she would work with children too. And she's just got this beautiful energy. But most of these people are, not hermits or recluses, but they're not the most social often, but given the opportunity, they might be. And if any museum has the educational arm to reach out to them, it would be yours. Especially Patricia, who just lives down the street from the museum, way west of the museum.
Yeah, we'll definitely look her up. Any other questions? Oh, here's a question about what are your plans for your collection?
Oh, gosh. That's what I've been asking myself. There's literally, I had to build, I think, a 20 by 24 foot block building in the backyard just to store it all. But I have made sense. I photographed every piece, so it's all cataloged. And I'm getting to that point of trying to figure that out. Any ideas, please call me.
Well, I love, too, the photographs of the artists. It gives us so much more of a sense of them.
Yeah.
So I know that that's probably all of your work.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I just can't sit still. Still.
I know, while we wait, here's another one. Anita Eidenberg.
It would make a wonderful book.
Well, Anita, the catalog is gorgeous.
Oh, I didn't see it.
Yeah, there. Can you see it
So
now?
we
Yes,
have,
I can.
So we have several of you instead of lunch have asked for the catalog instead, and those were mailed out yesterday. So you should be receiving those in the next couple of days. But it's also available in our bookstore, and of course, members get a discount in our museum store. And it really is wonderful because it captures all of the images. There's a couple of very good essays at the front. And there's little biographies of each of the artists toward the back, as well as a checklist. So get them early. I mean, we sold out of our Imagining Florida, and I think that this will be a very popular catalog, especially since the show is traveling from Boca Raton. It goes to Tampa and then to Orlando. So get your catalog while the exhibition is still on view in Boca Raton. That's my recommendation.
I would add, too, the catalog is beautiful, and it's a great remembrance of the exhibition. But to see, if you have the opportunity to see these works up front and personal, they really have a different meaning. So I encourage people, if they feel good about going to the museum, to please do so. I know that the museum adheres to strict policies for safety's sake, but I hope you all are able to get to the museum as well.
Here's another question that's quite interesting: is how does an outsider artist get an opportunity for somebody like you or other collectors to see their work today? Is there a network of people?
Not really. It takes courage for a fine arts museum, i.e. yours, to even mount an exhibition like this. Because it does not fit into the typical thinking of the canon of fine arts. Having said that, over the last 20 years, this art has been co-opted into the mainstream, but still it's not for every museum curator to understand and embrace. It's not esoteric. It's very visceral, and it's got a strange power to it. But no, it's a pretty closed community, but it just takes courage amongst museum professionals to deal with this freshly. I remember when I was writing the book Extraordinary Interpretations 20 years ago, I called up a curator at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City because they had just mounted a show of master drawings. And I think it had like a Renoir on it, but it also had a Bill Traylor. Bill Traylor is a very, very important contemporary, or he's deceased now, but self-taught outsider artist. He used to sell his paintings for a nickel a piece. Now they can sell for $500,000 a piece. But I said 20 years ago to the curator, I said, I just want to ask, how do you bring a Bill Traylor into an exhibition of this historical caliber? And her answer was classic. She said, hey, good art is good art. And it just takes an open mind to understand what good art can be. So we're seeing more and more of it, but it's not easy to see. And again, it's to Irvin's credit, as he always does, to show work that's daring and cutting edge and etc. So
I think one of the things that's special about our museum and really makes us unique in South Florida is we have an art school. So we are really invested in creativity for everybody. And when Gary says this exhibition is visceral, it absolutely is. I encourage you all to come and visit as soon as you feel that you are able to. And please remember, as Irvin had mentioned at the beginning of the program, we have instituted these member mornings on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday starting at 10. So it gives you really a whole hour to almost experience the museum on your own. And you can schedule that by calling the museum. Talk to Valerie Johnson is keeping our schedule for member mornings. It's a really very safe way to visit the museum. And in addition to Gary's show, we just will open to the public tomorrow, the glass dress, the new glass dress edition. Keep in mind, it's not fully installed yet. We've had some delay with our installation team from Italy, but within 3 or 4 weeks, that will be fully installed. And even if you come in before then, there is a lot to see. And then another Florida artist upstairs, Paul Gervais, very diminutive, very beautiful portraits and still lifes. So there's a lot to see at the museum. And we thank you all for being with us today. I had wanted to mention also that our next event, you'll soon be receiving a flyer in the mail about it. It's scheduled for February 16th, a Friends event that we are hosting in conjunction with the Boca Raton Jewish Film Festival. One of their films is called Maverick Modigliani. It's a new documentary about the artist who had, of course, a very short and pretty dramatic career. And our curator, Kelly Bodel, is going to be talking about his work in conversation with Wendy Honig, who is the artistic director for the festival. So the way it's going to work is we'll send the information out, but it's $12 to have a 3-day window to see the film, February 14th through 16th. And then on the 16th is at 11 is for the free workshop to a free Zoom lecture about the film. So we encourage you to participate, and we're putting together some Friends programs for March as well. So have a great day, everybody.
Roberta, we have here, Robin has a question.
Yeah.
I taught nursery school and kindergarten, and I always found that the children would come up with the most beautiful creations. And it just seems to me that because of the lack of training of these outsider artists, they're still able to summon this inner creativity, which is stifled by a lot of the training.
I agree. 100%. Are you still there, Robin? Or
yeah, I'm still here.
I am. When we relocated from Miami Beach to DeLand, Florida, I got the local newspaper, and every day they had a drawing by a young child about the weather. And these were the most gorgeous, gorgeous drawings. And I went to the newspaper and I said, "Can you save me these drawings?" I said, "Yeah, just come once a month and we'll save them for you." But back then, before digital, they put some blue ink on everything that make notes, and so they kind of ruined them all. But I agree with you; it was so pure and so real and so full of wonder, and it is often lost through the formalization of or education or being taught how the right way is to do something. Bravo! I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, me too. And one of the special things about the catalog is we did commission a poem by Campbell McGrath, who lives in Miami, to kind of give a little bit of expression to what is it about Florida that brings this creativity to life. It's quite wonderful. Gloria Cohen.
First of all, thank you. That was just... It was just wonderful. And I want to thank Irvin. He has insight like no one else. And Roberta and Tatiana and Valerie. It was a wonderful morning. I do something under normal circumstances. Is that what we called the other years ago, like a year ago? I volunteer and teach art to autistic children, special needs children. And what I do is, because very often these schools are very limited in their supplies, I go to the dollar store. My rule is $20, nothing less, nothing more each week, and then I leave the supplies. What comes out of these classrooms is incredible. Yep. And they're so proud of it. It's such an accomplishment that it would be nice if we could do something and share some of these programs, some of this artwork, but they're just so thrilled to hang them up and to take them home and to show who they are. So I really thought this was a fabulous morning.
Thank you. And, a lot of people, I think, a lot of children don't learn traditionally. They're more hands-on learners, and they figure the world out as they're going through it, and they yield great creativity when it's not stifled, like you're saying. And thank you for doing what you do for them. And I hope that you can connect with Patricia Calamari, Roberta, and see if there's a program that can fill that interest and need.
Yeah, we definitely will. And to let everybody know, we're working on an initiative because one of the effects of COVID has been we have no school tours. So, with all those warnings in the museum where we had public school students coming through, that's not happening now. And I don't know when that's going to restart. I think as schools come back into in-person. So our understanding of where does this art and creativity hit children, we have a lot more families coming to the museum. So we're starting an initiative called The Great Create. And what this will do is put together art supplies and activities in a box that will be going into families' homes. One of the effects of COVID too is that kids are spending way too much time online, and they need to be getting their hands dirty. So this is really an initiative to give parents the supplies and ideas and encouragement to really have fun with art in the home. It's kind of been inspired for us. Remember, reading is fundamental, and now parents know if I want my children to succeed, I really need to instill reading from their earliest years. And this is really the same thing with art needs to happen. Been a really great conversation today. Oh, Robin, it looks like Robin has another.
If it's okay, I just want to quickly thank everyone from the Friends Auxiliary, those of us, Marlene and Doreen and myself, who put this together, and it was supposed to be done last March. Obviously, you all know the history, and I want to thank Gary.
Oh,
and
you're welcome.
I hope that maybe in the future we can meet in person and do something else.
Sure.
This has been it's been a fabulous ending.
Well, great.
Considering everything. And thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you all.
Yes, and thank everyone who has stayed with us and come back for this virtual event.
Well, with that, I think that concludes our event. And thank you so much, Robin. And thank you, Gary. Thank you, Irvin. And have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Roberta.
Thank you.